Well, hello, everybody. The Sustainability Club here, and as promised, we're here to present the information that you need to form an informed opinion on the carbon credits system and all the trading and buzz that we've been hearing about it. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I certainly feel privileged that you would give your time to such an important topic, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that it's efficient and useful information. So let's get going. Carbon Credits 101. Through this course, we're going to talk about what they are, carbon credits, how they came to be, what a carbon cap and trade framework is that governs the carbon credits. How do you make a carbon credit? Who buys them? And what are their value? What are they all about? What's their use? What carbon capture and carbon sequestration is, as well as afforestation, as it's a key element to the market. We'll also take a look at the process of trading carbon credits on the market. We'll take a look at the risks and benefits as well, and we'll wrap it up with a summary of the information. The purpose of the training is to help the public and our club members establish, I should say, if you're not a club member yet, we'd love for you to join or subscribe, but to help people in general establish a clear understanding of what carbon credits are and also what the carbon credit trading phenomena is all about. So what are carbon credits? Hang on. So carbon credits are a representative of an emission reduction certificate. They're worth or amount to 1,000 kilograms of a greenhouse gas, and they're expressed as carbon dioxide equivalents. And it really means that somebody's taken out 1,000 kilograms of weight of carbon dioxide or equivalents of greenhouse gases from our atmosphere, those things we've been hearing about that have been causing climate change. So collectively, the greenhouse gases, or the gases that are driving our climate change, are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, perfluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, and nitrogen trifluoride. To make things simple, when we're measuring those gases, each one of them, before we report that mass of that individual greenhouse gas, we mathematically convert it to an equivalent carbon dioxide. The conversion factor permits simplicity in that we discuss and can now call the collective greenhouse gas emissions carbon dioxide equivalents. So it's not just carbon dioxide. And why did we choose carbon dioxide? It's probably the biggest offender, but that's simply it. We are talking about all of these compounds when we talk about carbon credits. And we have to ask ourselves, who was the genius that brought this new phrase into our lives? It sometimes confuses us, and as we're hearing, it's going to affect our economy. Maybe not. I can't tell the future, but let's take a look at where they came from. It'll give it some credibility or not. So where did it all begin? Back in 1997, believe it or not. I kind of remember it myself, being 56 years old, but just barely. Anyways, the Kyoto Protocol, I guess, coined the phrase and the notion of what a carbon credits were and the trading of them and what that meant. Basically, it was an idea of a system that would help mitigate the climate change that we're experiencing. Back then, it was to prevent it from happening, and today we're finding we're trying to control it now. So several years later, 2015, at the Paris Accord, or meeting of the minds again, they had established Article 6, which reinforced the carbon credit trading system in that all of the countries that were there committed to recognizing it. And they brought some good evidence to compel everybody to do that. they, with the research, had evidence that carbon trading would not only mitigate the climate, change, it would slow it down, in other words, but that it would also provide savings to countries in the magnitude of each country, $250 billion a year by the year 2030. And I think what they're talking about there is that, I mean, me living in Abbotsford, last year we had a brutal flood. The year before, the province suffered some tragic fires, and the damages were, comparable when we just look at one province in our country. If we expand that to include all of our provinces or the entire country, not having to spend that money to repair and get people back to the quality of life that they're used to. I think that's what they're talking about when they're saying it's going to save us, because climate change is causing damage. In 2021, Glasgow Climate Pact was signed. And signing that pact meant that through a conference of the parties, which the UN chaired, United Nations, at that meeting in Glasgow, they resoluted or agreed as a whole group of countries that they would organize, going away from that meeting, a global marketplace to trade carbon credits. So as the countries left that meeting and that commitment, they developed a framework for it, which is a good idea for any economic system, and they called it the Carbon Credit Cap and Trade Framework. And it's pretty simple what that framework is. A cap and trade policy evolved, as I had mentioned, and where the cap simply means it's the maximum limit of carbon equivalent emissions, so the maximum limit of greenhouse gas emissions that any company is permitted to produce. And in eventuality, any country is allowed to produce. The trade part of that phrase, cap and trade, provided companies an ability to sell and buy carbon credits. If they had a surplus allowance, meaning they've taken actions to reduce their emissions, they were given credits. And for every 1,000 pounds of emissions that their actions prevented, they earned 1 credit for that 1,000 pounds. And some of the industries in our country here in Canada, as well as throughout the world, they couldn't stop that quick. We're bought into a greenhouse gas, industry. Our cars produce it, our factories produce it, mining. We can't just stop that right away. It would be ludicrous. So the companies that are earning credits were given this trading exchange, and they could sell their earned or reduction credits for money to companies that were exceeding their allowable limits. So it provided companies to continue to pollute while they were given time, in other words, to reduce their emissions, not overnight, as I said, but over time. And it enabled them to do it by having partners that were developing credits. So while somebody on the other side of Canada is reducing their emissions, I'm over here producing too much. I'll buy enough of their credits to bring my level of emission down to an allowable limit. So it is an actual reduction of carbon emission in our air. If you read the 4 types of trade assets there in the slide, there's the assigned amount units, which is just the carbon emission itself. The removal units, which is the credit. Emission reduction units generated by joint implementation projects or human intervention and invention, and certified emission reductions generated by clean development projects. Each asset, though, is equal to 1,000 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. So what we're seeing now in my day-to-day life, as I'm sure with you guys, is that the tire's hitting the road on this stuff. You can buy and sell as an individual or a company carbon credits. I own a few stocks in a few of the companies that are facilitating and gathering carbon credits. I think they're going to be quite valuable in some time, but what do I know? I've had some investments that have gone very, very bad too. So, not an investment suggestion or recommendation by any means, but it does seem to be hitting our economy, and we're starting to see through FTEs at the Toronto Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange, companies being evaluated based on their business, and their business is buying and selling these carbon credits. And to facilitate that, not unlike the trade markets of Toronto and New York and Japan, China, UK, there's an exchange that's been developed in those countries, and they require a broker, and those brokers are who I've invested with. Their companies and net values are presented as an offering on the Toronto Stock Exchange or New York Stock Exchange. I'm not buying credits from that exchange, but I am investing in companies that are doing that brokerage, and they assist companies and individuals to buy and sell these carbon credits so that we can reduce, slowly and over time, but dramatically reduce while we're getting there, our carbon emissions. And what we've seen develop through the, I guess, establishment of the carbon credit trading markets are primarily two. There's a compliance market, and that through international agreements had governments around the world impose unilateral restrictions within their boundaries. So the Canadian government takes care of Canada, the United States, and so forth. They establish legislation and regulations that permit allowable levels of greenhouse gases. But if you're exceeding those greenhouse gases, enforcement through Environment Canada enforcement officers in our country's case, will actually monitor these companies that are emitting, and if they're exceeding their emissions, they're getting fined. They're also being held responsible to inventory their emissions and implement reduction strategies. And that's where the carbon credits come in. Right now anyways, an acceptable means of reducing your carbon emissions for these larger companies are through the purchase of carbon offset credits, reductions that other people are doing. They'll buy that value. There's also a voluntary market, and I think that's probably what we hear about more often than the industrial compliance market. Companies like, McDonald's, or I don't know, retail stores who offer in their campaigns that they're carbon neutral. That's basically because they've engaged in the same type of market. Not always have those companies themselves reduce their carbon emissions to zero. But what they do is a combination of buying credits and changing the way they do business. So a good example is if you're a taxi company, you would, in effect, maybe come up with the idea of, I'm going to, as a carbon reduction strategy, next year I'm going to make sure that 50% of my cars are electrical driven. Now there still is some carbon generation, equivalent gas generation from the manufacturer of electric cars, to be sure, but over the lifetime cycle, cradle to death of that car, the emissions are dramatically less than the combustion or gas driven car. So there's the strategy. Next year I'm going to reduce my carbon emissions through implementing a 50% fleet of my fleet is going to be electric. That earns them actually whatever the carbon would have been released to the environment from those 50% of their fleet taxis, they would earn credits for. And they could, and typically do, use those credits to absolve or cap and trade those existing gas cars, the other 50%. So in fact, they're gaining a simple simple example, and it's a little more complicated, but to get the idea, they reduce 50% of their emissions by buying electric vehicles, and they apply the earned credits from that reduction to the remaining 50%, and you have carbon neutrality. Kind of neat, eh? And it's an actual reduction of 50% of that company's emissions, and it gets them to a level where the remaining are being offset by the purchase or application, in this case, of their own credits to their own company. If they were happy with that 50%, and I don't see why anybody would be, that's a big reduction for 1 year, they could put the remaining 50 credits or 50% of those credits or the credits they earned on the market, and other companies could buy them and reduce their emissions. And the reporting structure on that's pretty stringent too. All of the credits have to be verified by third-party certified carbon credit counters, I guess, basically. It's quite regulated. I'm studying right now a course in the general accounting principles of these carbon credits. That course won't certify me. It won't enable me or empower me to validate credits. But through that learning process, I discovered that it is a policed process for sure. And the federal government is the one that administrates that. And here's an example of some of the companies that I know we're all familiar with. That are already engaged in carbon equivalent purchasing, credit purchasing, to help offset the impacts of their business. You know the nice thing about this system, and there's good and bad to everything. What I like about it is we're actually monetizing an environmental service for the first time. Where if you were going to hurt the air, you're going to have to work to clean the air that you've actually impacted. So Mother Nature's getting taken care of. Now, is this the perfect system? I'm already finding, and we'll talk about some of the risks into buying into this system holistically. It's not perfect by any means. But it is a movement towards the monetization or recognition of the monetary value of Mother Nature. You know, for instance, I think I mentioned in my last class, I surf a lot, and the companies that I pay, I go to their surf camps, and you pay to stay there, and they're right on the beach, so you're 50 feet from the break. They don't manufacture those waves. Those waves are manufactured naturally by Mother Nature, and it would be kind of neat to see that company pay for the protection of that water, because it's really their product. I wouldn't be going there if they didn't have those waves. I don't think the waves are going to break down and become flat water, but pollution. Surfers hate surfing in garbage. As a matter of fact, we don't. And you've heard about the garbage that's floating in the ocean. It has destroyed some great surf breaks, to say nothing of the environments that are inhabited by creatures and that require those habitats to procreate and flourish. It's terrible. So that's what I like about this. We're for the first time recognizing that we're calling them eco-services, I guess, and they're not free anymore. I don't think they ever should be, but we're running out of them, and supply and demand has had our economic systems start to include their value in terms of dollars and cents. And so how does one generate a carbon credit that is sellable on the carbon market exchange? That's where things get kind of interesting. Innovation, and it's incentivized by getting paid. So you or me, or we could form a partnership, can generate carbon credits, and we can sell them and make money off them. It's a form of manufacturing, to be quite honest. And there are many ways to generate the carbon credits. Here's just, a few: carbon sequestration, afforestation, and direct air capture, which we'll take a look at. The one I think that's ripe for investment, and again, maybe I'm wrong, is carbon sequestration. And it's simply the process of capturing carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and stabilizing it into a solid or dissolved forms that are not going to be re-released into the atmosphere. In other words, we're cleaning the atmosphere through an industrial process to reduce the human carbon footprint, which seems to be a problem, right? The other example that I provided in the previous slide was direct air capture. It's a little more complex, and it's rocket science. You need to know what you're doing in terms of your training, a lot of schooling and a lot of monetary investment to get this type of thing going. It's really a liquid solvent or a solid sorbent will strip the CO2 out of the air, and it separates it from the other gases in the air. So it's not taking too much out of the air, but simply the contaminant we'll call that carbon dioxide. Once the capture agent is saturated, it's kind of like your Brita filter. Once it's no longer usable, it's absorbed all the contaminant it can. It's superheated. The CO2 is released from it, regenerating the captured agent for reuse. And we have a lot of industrial uses for carbon dioxide. Trying to get it in a pure sense from a source that gives it to you pure for your manufacturing process is the market that the direct air capture, or companies that are doing direct air capture, are feeding that into those companies that use carbon dioxide as a raw material for manufacture. Highly intensive in the amount of energy it uses, and that typically means money. And where are they getting that energy? If it's not a green source, those carbon emissions through the process of the direct air capture depreciate the amount of carbon credits that type of system can generate. So it's not only costly, but it's not as efficient as other models that we've talked about. And my favorite, because I love hanging out in them, afforestation, the woods. Planting trees where no trees have grown in the last 100 years. Commonly used are short rotation woody crops. Hybrid polar is one of the more common ones because they grow quickly. And the kick there, if you didn't know, you probably do, is that when a tree grows, it actually uses carbon dioxide as food. Kind of neat, eh? If it wasn't for the industrial releases, the balance of carbon sequestration through vegetation is quite effective. We wouldn't get this unbalanced amount of carbon dioxide in the air. So Mother Nature's forests are diminishing with time through forestry companies cutting down the wood and using it for a variety of things, and also through natural means, fires. Primarily, it's kind of like spinning out of control. The hotter the climate gets, the more fires there are, and the less sequestration value the forests provide because they're shrinking. It's the big problem you're hearing about Brazil. They're not burning them, although that's happening too. They're also cutting them down at a dramatic rate to provide farming land. So when an afforestation project, there's a study done that will determine the best suited location, addressing environmental risks to the water supply, the ecosystems, and you just don't go out and plant these trees anywhere. You do an impact assessment. Then when that figures itself out and you find it, you've got a good area to plant that type of tree, they plant the trees within 10 to 15 years. If you're getting the good varieties, you're developing a significant sequestration model for carbon. It's sold paper processed as wood and products, and that carbon dioxide stays in those wood products. it doesn't get released into the atmosphere, right? Addresses other environmental concerns such as barren land too and soil erosions. We used to have a lot of trees, and I really, my heart sort of calls for this type of method to be, adopted in all the countries around the world. We've, really taken advantage of forests. It's time to pay them back, right? But like everything, there's risks. Let's take a look at them. As I had mentioned in one of my earlier classes, climate change is only one of one of the 17 sustainable development goals. Another one of them is economics. We have to maintain an economic, pace that allows us to thrive and not be destitute or poverty stricken. Unfortunately, there's a risk of this carbon credit market impacting negatively our economic stability. When you look at just the timeline between July and August this year, we saw a price fluctuation of 22% of the value of these carbon credits. That's quite a swing. It's not stable. Somewhere along the line, individuals lost 20% of their savings, and over a very short period of time. Not good. So when we take a look at the instability of that market, it's something we should be focusing on regulating to make a little more stable. And until that happens, we're looking at one sustainable development goal, or the pursuit of one, threatening one of those three imperatives, our economic systems, Mother Nature, the environment, and our societal needs. So if that's going to happen, unfortunately, carbon credits won't be the solution. But there's a lot of good minds trying to figure that out, get the instability, volatility, in other words, out of that system. What we've seen with the voluntary market is much less regulated, which has created an accreditation bodies are popping up all over the place. They're not centralized. They don't follow a standard level of care. They don't all do things the same way. And when you have that happening, if one of those carbon accreditation bodies falls out of favor, so does the entire value of all of the carbon credits that they've valuated or certified. And that again would be a dramatic crash or loss of money. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, that volatility, this too, the decentralized accreditation systems or boards are providing a risk of, again, threatening a stable economic system. And we would be cutting our nose off in spite of our face, sort of thing, right? It certainly doesn't bite into the values or the outcomes of sustainable development. Got to be careful with this one, but it's a great idea. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the stock markets are grabbing it, and we know what they do. So lots of good ideas there and benefits, some pretty scary flip sides. And I'm not here to say which of them is likely to influence the system of carbon credit trading more than another. To me, it's a risky proposition if we can't guarantee the outcomes on this stuff, right? There's some things we can tolerate risk on. I don't really think this is one. So, I'd kind of like to see the verification of the system occur, the regulations It comes without education to most of the countries. Kind of why I'm doing this. I'd like us to all understand it before we get convinced it's a good path to follow. Most of us are really only being educated from one side, and that's the ones that tend to have a benefit of financial reward, them and them only, not the country as a whole or the community as a whole. So they're the ones that are providing the information. It's biased, that's the way things are in our world. So investors, governments, general marketplace are showing increased interest in generating and purchasing these carbon credits to offset our emissions, to give us some time, buy some time, so that we can change our life quality dependence on greenhouse gas emitting things to less harmful things. But again, if we're doing that too quick, and we have a propensity to have a great idea, put it into place, and find out much later that it was a horrible idea. It's the human condition, right? So I think it's important that we know that and manage that risk. We're never going to remove that from human nature. It's one of our frailties. But knowing that and putting controls into place to manage it, the risk down to an acceptable level. And we're not only talking about environmental or economic stability being threatened. If this fails us, it fails the carbon capture, or in other words, the climate action efforts that we're putting in, and things will get worse. It's still emerging, and when anything's new, it can be dangerous if not fully understood, the outcomes. Recent landmark agreement, though, was forged in Glasgow, as I had mentioned, and there was pretty good minds there, much greater than mine for sure. Probably be the dimmest light in that room, and that provides me confidence. I really respect the United Nations think tank. It really is made up of some of the greatest scientific, economic, and social scientists in the world. So let's hope, let's keep our ear to the ground, let's get involved, let's not let them take it to us. Let's, make sure that, and simply this information that I've given you, it'll help, get you to make a more well-informed decision. I hope it's triggers a few more questions too. I still have a lot that I want to answer. That's why I'm going to that accounting school. It's really the Greenhouse Gas Institute that provides that training. I have no affiliation with them other than I paid them to take that course because I don't want to be misinformed on this. I want to understand it. It sounds like a great idea, and I want to see the evidence, man. So in closing, again, you've joined me in my little music studio. Thanks for your time. I hope I helped to answer or provide some clarity on some of the issues surrounding the framework of carbon credits. It's not a goodbye. It's a see you later. It's a little trick that I learned. Never say goodbye. That's too dramatic. I'll see you later. And I think too, to kind of mix things up a little bit and keep this fun and appreciate the arts. I'm not a great artist, but I like to spend my time practicing them, hence the music studio. So I think the next couple of days I'll maybe put out a contribution, play a song for you guys. Hopefully you like it. Tell me if you don't, I'll do something else for sure. And if anybody else wanted to contribute a little video of themselves playing some musical instruments, or just showing some of your art, I would be your vehicle to do that, and would really love to share that with the club members. So until next time, we'll see you later. Take good care of your neighbors. Good care of yourselves. You all deserve it, man. We do. Take care.